It was supposed to be just another morning.
I can't sit, Ms. Walker. It hurts too much.
He says you're in pain, won't sit. I'm not jumping to conclusions, but something's not right.
We needed to know the truth. So, we recorded him.
Know what we do.
I can't sit, Ms. Walker. It hurts too much. When a 10-year-old boy stood trembling beside his desk, refusing to sit, his teacher thought it was just a stomach ache. But what she uncovered shattered everything she believed about his family. No one can know what we do. Liam Turner stood next to his desk with his small hands gripping the edges of his notebook. His brown eyes were focused, his pencil moved quickly, and yet he wouldn't sit. It had already been nearly an hour since Ms. Emily Walker had started the lesson. The math equations were on the whiteboard, the class was relatively quiet, but something didn't feel right. Her instincts, sharpened over years of teaching, buzzed in her chest like a low, quiet alarm. She turned from the board, watching her 10-year-old student. "Liam, sweetie, you can go ahead and sit down. It's okay, hun. It'll be easier to write that way," she said gently, her voice as soft as the Pacific Northwest rain tapping the windows outside. Liam barely looked up. He offered a weak smile, the kind that looked like it took effort, the kind no child should have to fake. "I'm fine, Mrs. Walker. I'd just rather stand today." Mrs. Walker tilted her head, frowning ever so slightly. "Are you sure? It's okay if you're feeling uncomfortable, or—" "I promise," he interrupted quickly, eyes back on his notebook, shoulders slightly raised as if trying to stretch away some invisible pain. "It's just more comfortable like this." The word comfortable hung in the air like a lie everyone pretended not to notice. Around him, a few other students exchanged glances. No one said anything, but Ms. Walker could sense it, the whisper of curiosity and confusion that spreads quietly through a classroom when something's off. Kids don't choose to stand all morning, not without a reason. Still, she let it go, for now. As the bell rang for recess, Mrs. Walker gathered her things slowly. Liam was also slower than usual, carefully putting his notebook away, never bending too far, never moving quickly. She approached him as discreetly as she could, crouching slightly to his level. "Liam, are you heading straight home after school today?" she asked in a calm, conversational tone. He nodded. "Yeah, my dad's picking me up." Her brow furrowed. I thought your mum usually picked you up." "She's out of town, visiting my aunt. It's just me and my dad for a few days." He said it quickly, like a line he had practiced. There it was again, that unease crawling up Ms. Walker's spine like a shadow on a cold day. She smiled, though careful not to show it. "I see. Well, if you need anything, you know I'm here, okay?" "I know," Liam said, still avoiding her eyes. "Thanks, Ms. Walker." He turned and walked away, slowly, carefully, and just like that, he was gone. But she noticed something else, the way he moved. His legs were stiff, his steps were short. Each movement seemed calculated, as if sitting or bending had become painful. Mrs. Walker stood by the classroom door for a moment, frozen. This wasn't just a phase. This wasn't a dare or some quirky thing kids do. This was something else. Something was wrong with Liam Turner, and she didn't know what, but her gut told her one thing. It was hurting him, and it was hurting him somewhere no one could see. Here begins part 2, The Way He Walks, a chapter steeped in quiet tension and psychological suspense, drawing us deeper into the mystery surrounding young Liam Turner. The next day, the rain had stopped, but the clouds still clung low over Portland, casting a grey light through the windows of Hazel Ridge Elementary. Inside room 204, Miss Walker stood behind her desk with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, trying to shake off the lingering unease that had followed her home the night before. She hadn't slept much. Liam's face, that forced smile, that stiff way he walked, it haunted her. She couldn't stop seeing it every time she closed her eyes. And sure enough, the moment the school bell rang and the children began streaming in, Liam was one of the last to enter. His hoodie was too large for him, sleeves falling past his wrists. His backpack seemed heavier than usual, and just like the day before, he stood at his desk, opened his notebook, and didn't even attempt to sit. She watched him as discreetly as possible. Every movement he made told a story, but it was a story she couldn't quite read. Not yet. But then it happened. As the class got underway and students began copying notes from the board, Ms. Walker took a moment to walk down the aisle, not to intimidate or pressure, but just to observe. That's when she saw it. Liam was shifting his weight between his legs, not out of boredom or restlessness, but discomfort. When he reached for his pencil, his entire body leaned forward from the waist instead of bending his knees. And when he had to move his backpack, he did so with his arms only, avoiding any lower body strain. But it was the walk that told her everything. When he went to sharpen his pencil, he moved slowly, too slowly. Each step was short, deliberate, almost like someone who had just recovered from surgery, or someone trying not to aggravate an injury. Ms. Walker's chest tightened. He wasn't lazy, he wasn't fidgety, he was in pain, real pain, and he was trying to hide it. By the time recess came around, she had already decided she couldn't wait any longer. As the children gathered their things, she lingered by the door, pretending to straighten a poster on the wall. Liam walked past her like all the others, but again with that same strange, stiff gait. And then she saw him. Across the courtyard, beyond the metal gates of the school, stood a tall man in a dark coat. He wore black sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast, and his expression was unreadable, cold, unmoving. Greg Turner, Liam's father. There was something about him, not just the way he stood with his hands deep in his pockets, but the way he looked through people, not at them. Mrs. Walker had never met him before. Rachel, the boy's mother, was usually the one picking Liam up, but she instantly felt that tightening in her gut again. Liam walked toward him without hesitation, but there was no hug, no smile, just a quiet hand grab, and then they turned and walked off. It didn't look like a dad picking up his son, it looked like something else, and suddenly Mrs. Walker's instincts once again screamed, "Something is wrong here." Here begins part 3, Secrets Behind the Pain, the part where quiet suspicion turns into painful realization and the seed of fear begins to grow roots. It was Wednesday morning when Mrs. Walker made up her mind. She had barely touched her coffee that day. The feeling in her stomach wasn't nerves anymore. It was dread. She couldn't let another day go by pretending everything was normal when nothing about Liam Turner was normal anymore. By the time the second period began, Liam was once again standing beside his desk, carefully scribbling notes in his math book. His back was stiff, and his face, although calm, looked pale, not the usual flushed cheeks of a 10-year-old boy. This time, she didn't say anything in front of the class. She didn't want to embarrass him. She just watched quietly. And when recess came, she called his name in that soft, motherly tone only experienced teachers have. "Liam, could you stay behind for a minute?" The other kids rushed out of the room, the sound of sneakers echoing through the hallway. But Liam lingered, shoulders tense. He already knew something was coming. "We can talk over here, Mrs." Walker said gently, motioning to the reading corner, a quiet, cozy spot in the back of the room with beanbags and old picture books. He followed her there but didn't sit. Of course not. She sat on a beanbag, trying to look relaxed, non-threatening. "Safe. Sweetheart," she began. "Can I ask you something? You know you can always be honest with me, right? Liam nodded slowly, but said nothing. I've noticed you haven't been sitting during class this week. And the way you walk, it's careful, like it hurts. There was a flicker in his eyes, a second of panic, and then he looked down at his sneakers. I just pulled something, he mumbled. Ms. Walker leaned forward slightly, still gentle. Is it your back? He shook his head, slowly, hesitantly. She waited. Then where does it hurt, honey? For a moment, he didn't answer. His lips trembled, his fingers fidgeted with the zipper of his hoodie. Finally, in the quietest whisper, he said, Back there. Her breath caught in her chest. She knew what he meant. Back where? She asked softly, afraid of the answer. He motioned vaguely behind himself, embarrassed. It's just uncomfortable when I sit, that's all. Did you fall? Did someone hurt you? He quickly shook his head. No, it'll go away soon. My dad says it's not a big deal. I just have to keep standing. Ms. Walker's heart cracked a little. Liam, she whispered, I need to know what happened. Did something happen at home? He hesitated, then looked up at her with pleading eyes. Please don't be mad. I didn't do anything bad. I swear it just started after something me and my dad were doing. What were you doing? She asked gently. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, he looked away and shrugged. It's nothing. I'm fine. I just don't want to sit for a while, that's all. And then he tried to sit, just for a second, on the edge of the reading rug. The pain was immediate. His whole face twisted. He winced, stood right back up, and gently rubbed the back of his legs with one hand. Ms. Walker watched him, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. Sweetheart, have you seen a doctor? Liam shook his head. My dad said I didn't need to, that it'll go away. And there it was. The second time he had mentioned his father, always connected to the pain, always the one telling him what to do, always the gatekeeper between discomfort and help. She leaned in closer and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. If your dad ever did something that hurt you, anything at all, you can tell me. I'll believe you. And I'll protect you. Liam looked at her like she had just stepped onto a minefield. No, he said quickly, shaking his head. My dad never hit me. Never. He'd never do that. But his eyes were saying something else. And then, before she could ask more, he pulled back. I have to go eat now. Recess is almost over, he said abruptly, voice shaky. She let him go. There was no use pressing harder. Not yet. But as she watched him walk away again, slow, stiff and silent, Ms. Walker knew in her bones whatever was happening to Liam Turner, it was serious, and it wasn't going to go away on its own. Here begins Part 4. The Hidden Recorder, a tense and pivotal chapter where doubt becomes action, and the quiet concern of one teacher evolves into something far more dangerous and necessary. The school day ended under heavy skies. The first drops of rain began tapping on the windows just as Ms. Walker returned to her classroom after bus duty. The room was quiet now, but Liam's pain still echoed between the desks like a whisper she couldn't unhear. She stood for a long moment, staring at his empty seat, or rather, the space next to it. He hadn't used that chair all week. She could still see his face from earlier. That forced calm, that flinch when she asked if his father had hurt him. No bruises, no marks, but so much pain and secrets. Ms. Walker grabbed her phone and headed down the hallway with brisk, purposeful steps. The time for guessing was over. Inside the administrative office, Mrs. Denise Carter, the school principal, was finishing up a phone call when Ms. Walker walked in without knocking. Denise, she said firmly, shutting the door behind her, I need to talk to you. It's serious. Mrs. Carter hung up immediately. She knew that look. Ms. Walker wasn't someone who panicked easily. Sit, what's going on? Ms. Walker explained everything, from Liam's refusal to sit to the pained walk, the vague answers, and most of all, what he had said during recess. He told me it hurts back there, and that it started after something he and his dad were doing together, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He wouldn't tell me what. He just said his dad told him it wasn't a big deal, that it would go away. Mrs. Carter's eyes narrowed with concern. Do you think he's being abused? I don't want to think it, Miss Walker whispered. But yes, it's the only thing that makes sense. His mom's out of town, he's alone with his father, and he's clearly scared. There was a long pause. Mrs. Carter stood and walked to the filing cabinet, her face tense. She opened the bottom drawer, pulled something out, and returned to her desk. A small silver device, barely bigger than a pen. A voice recorder, Miss Walker asked. I keep it for sensitive meetings, but we can use it. Hide it in his backpack. See what happens when he leaves school. If his father says anything, maybe we'll get proof. Miss Walker stared at the recorder, heart pounding. It was a line they were about to cross. Is this even legal? It's not ideal, Mrs. Carter admitted. But we're not broadcasting it. We're not sharing it. We're protecting a child, and if nothing happens, at least we'll know. But if something is happening to Liam, then we'll have what we need to act. Silence filled the office. And then Ms. Walker nodded. Let's do it. That afternoon, just before dismissal, Mrs. Walker returned to the classroom while the kids were still on the playground. She knelt beside Liam's cubby, opened the back pocket of his backpack, the one with the small inner zipper nobody ever used, and gently slid the recorder inside. Her hands trembled, her breath caught in her throat, but she did it. A few minutes later, the bell rang. Liam packed up his things slowly, just like every other day, painfully, carefully. Miss Walker watched him the whole time. When he reached the door, she called out softly, "Take care, Liam." "Okay." He turned back and smiled, tired and fake, and nodded. "Thanks, Miss Walker." And then he was gone. She watched him cross the courtyard, dragging his backpack behind him. Greg Turner was waiting. Again, same coat, same sunglasses, same unreadable face. Father and son walked away, hand in hand, silent, disconnected. But this time, someone was listening. Here begins part 5. No one can know what we do. A chapter where silence is finally broken, and what's heard in the shadows shakes the soul of everyone listening. The next morning, Portland was quiet under a grey blanket of fog. Mrs. Walker arrived at Hazel Ridge Elementary earlier than usual. She sat alone in her car for several minutes before heading inside, the recorder's potential playing over and over in her mind like a warning siren. Her fingers itched to know what it had captured, if anything. When Liam finally walked into the classroom, he looked worse than the day before. His skin was pale and his movements even slower, as if the simple act of walking had turned into something unbearable. He didn't complain, he didn't speak. He just went straight to his desk, stood beside it, and opened his notebook. When she approached to greet him, he tried to smile. "It's hurting a little more today, Mrs. Walker," he whispered. "But I'll be okay. I'll just keep standing." Ms. Walker nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "That's okay, sweetheart. However you feel better." She waited until recess, just like before. When the last student had left the room and Liam's backpack was hanging on the back of his chair, she moved quickly. The recorder was exactly where she had left it. She held it in her hand like it was something fragile, something sacred. Then she walked straight to Mrs. Carter's office. The principal was already standing when she arrived. No words were needed. Ms. Walker placed the device on the desk. Mrs. Carter pressed play. At first, they heard nothing but muffled classroom noise, the rustling of notebooks, chairs scraping, the chatter of children, then the sounds of dismissal, footsteps, hallway echoes, the metal squeak of the school gate. And then, silence. For a few seconds, only the ambient hum of the outside world could be heard, and then came the voice, deep, calm, controlled. "We're going to do that thing again today." Ms. Walker froze, her stomach turned. Then came Liam's voice, small and hesitant. "Dad, Could we maybe not do it today? It's bothering me. I couldn't even sit down properly at school. My teacher's getting suspicious." There was a pause, a long, uncomfortable pause. When the man spoke again, his voice was sharper. "What did she ask you?" "She asked if you had hit me. I told her no, that you've never done that to me, but she still thinks something's wrong because I keep standing." Another long pause. Then, a colder tone. "Did you tell her what we've been doing in secret?" Mrs. Walker covered her mouth. Mrs. Carter sat back in her chair, expression frozen. Liam's voice returned, quieter this time. "No, Dad. I didn't tell anyone, not even my friends. You said it was a secret, and I'm keeping it." A heavy breath came through the recording. Then the father spoke again. "That's right, son. You're a good boy. No one can know what we're doing in secret. Understand?" "No one." "I understand," Liam answered. Another shift in the man's voice. Gentler now. Manipulative. "Since you're a little sore, we'll take it easy today, but we still have to keep going. Okay? At least until your mum gets back. And if she calls, you don't say anything. Got it? Okay. And if your teacher asks again, just say you fell. Say you landed on your butt or something, but don't tell the truth, or your dad's gonna be in trouble. Promise me." "I promise." Click. The recording ended, and the silence that followed was unbearable. Ms. Walker's face had gone pale. Her hands trembled in her lap. She could barely breathe. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "That man is doing something to that boy. He made him lie. He told him to hide it. You heard it." Mrs. Carter didn't answer right away. Her face was drawn, eyes narrowed, mouth tight. Finally, she stood. "This sounds serious," she said slowly, "but we still don't know what exactly he's doing. We can't assume the worst. Not yet. If we go to the police now, and it turns out to be something else." "You heard that child," Mrs. Walker snapped. Her voice rose for the first time. "He's in pain. He's terrified. And his own father is telling him to keep secrets. You think I'm just going to sit here and wait for something worse to happen?" Mrs. Carter sighed heavily and held up a hand to calm her. "No, we're not waiting. We're calling his mother." That sentence stopped Miss Walker in her tracks. "Rachel?" "Yes," Mrs. Carter replied. "She needs to know. She's the only one who can tell us the truth. If there's anything at all happening in that house, she'll know. And if she doesn't, then we need to find out why." Ms. Walker exhaled shakily and nodded. "Find her," she said, "please, before it's too late." End of part 5. Let me know when you're ready for part 6, Looking for Rachel, where two women take a quiet drive into the unknown, chasing the only person who may hold the truth. Você disse, continua historias comoventes, grande. By Noshang, disse, here begins part 6, Looking for Rachel, a chapter where two women leave everything behind to chase answers, and what they find could change everything, or shatter it all. By lunchtime, Miss Walker could barely concentrate. She had tried to teach her third period class, but the words on the whiteboard meant nothing. Her mind was spinning. The sounds from the recorder played on a loop in her memory. No one can know what we're doing. If your teacher asks again, say you fell on your butt. Promise me. She kept seeing Liam's face, the way he bit his lip and shifted his weight from foot to foot, his eyes too tired for a 10-year-old. She could feel the fear in his voice now, not just discomfort, but obedience. That desperate, quiet obedience kids learn when they're afraid to make a wrong move. When the final bell rang and students left for the day, Ms. Walker didn't even pretend to stay behind. She walked straight to the front office, where Mrs. Carter was already standing with her car keys in hand. I found her, the principal said, not wasting a second. Where is she? Ms. Walker asked. She's outside the city, about 2 hours away, staying at her sister's farm near Silverton. Rachel's helping her with a newborn. Her sister just had a baby. Did you call her? I tried, Mrs. Carter said. No answer. No voicemail set up either. We're going in person. Miss Walker didn't hesitate. Let's go. The drive was long and mostly silent. Neither woman spoke as the streets of Portland turned to highway, and the highway gave way to endless hills and quiet roads lined with pine trees. Rain misted against the windshield, and the weight of what they might discover sat heavy between them. Ms. Walker stared out the window, fingers tapping anxiously against her knee. "What if we're wrong?" she whispered. Mrs. Carter didn't look at her. "And what if we're not?" The farm was modest, a single-story home with chipped white siding, a swing on the front porch, and the faint sound of a baby crying inside. When they knocked on the door, a woman appeared almost immediately. She had her dark hair tied in a messy bun and wore sweatpants and a hoodie. Her face was flushed, tired but warm. When she saw who was at the door, her expression changed from curiosity to concern. "Ms. Walker? Mrs. Carter? What are you doing here?" Rachel asked, stepping onto the porch. "Is something wrong? Did something happen to Liam?" Mrs. Carter raised both hands to calm her. "Rachel, he's okay. He's safe. We needed to speak with you." In private, Rachel stepped aside, gesturing them into the house. "Come in." Inside, the home was simple and cozy. A baby swing rocked gently in the corner. A crocheted blanket lay across the couch. Everything smelled like coffee and formula and freshly folded laundry. They sat around the living room table. Rachel looked between them, now clearly alarmed. "Please, what's going on? You're scaring me!" Miss Walker looked down, then back up, her voice tight. "It's about Liam." Rachel's heart stopped. "Did someone hurt him?" The teacher hesitated, then shook her head. "Not at school, but we think something's wrong at home, with your husband." Rachel blinked. "Greg?" she laughed, not because it was funny, but because it sounded ridiculous. "Greg may be a little strict, sure, but he would never hurt Liam." Mrs. Carter leaned forward. "We recorded something." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Recorded?" "We placed a voice recorder in Liam's backpack," Ms. Walker said quietly. "We were desperate. We didn't know what else to do. He's been refusing to sit in class, says it hurts, back there. And when we talked to him about it, he mentioned your husband several times." The room fell into silence. Mrs. Walker reached into her purse and pulled out the recorder. "We want you to hear it for yourself." Rachel stared at it like it was a bomb, and then she pressed play. The recording played the same as before. Greg's voice, low and composed. Liam's voice, hesitant and strained. The father asking for secrecy. The son begging to skip that day. The chilling instructions. By the time it ended, Rachel's hands were trembling. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, you're misunderstanding something. You must be... Greg wouldn't do that. He loves Liam. You don't know him." Mrs. Carter spoke softly. "We know this is difficult. We don't want to accuse anyone without knowing the full truth. That's why we came to you first." Rachel stood up abruptly and walked toward the kitchen. Her breathing was uneven. She pressed her hand against the counter for support. Then she picked up her phone and dialed quickly. They thought she was calling her husband, but she wasn't. "Hey, Jenny, listen. I need you to stay with the baby a little longer. Something came up. I have to go back home. It's urgent." She hung up and turned back to them. "If Greg even thought of hurting our son, if he laid a single finger on Liam, I swear to God, I'll put him in jail myself." Her voice cracked. Her eyes were on fire. "Let's go." Here begins part 7. Window to the Truth. The chapter where assumptions collapse, illusions shatter, and a mother comes face to face with something no heart is prepared to witness. The drive back to Portland felt twice as long as the trip out. Rachel sat in the back seat, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes glued to the window, but not really seeing the trees, the signs, or the winding roads. Her mind was stuck in replay mode. That voice, Greg's voice, kept echoing inside her skull. "We're going to do that thing again. No one can know what we're doing in secret." She had never heard him speak like that, never heard that quiet edge of control. of manipulation. And Liam, her little boy, so obedient, so apologetic, so willing to hide pain for his father's sake. What had she missed? Rachel's jaw clenched and her hands curled into fists in her lap. "I still don't understand," she whispered. "How could he?" Ms. Walker, behind the wheel, glanced at her in the rearview mirror but said nothing. Mrs. Carter, in the passenger seat, answered gently. "Sometimes, Rachel, the people closest to us are the hardest to see clearly." Rachel didn't respond. She wasn't ready to believe anything. Not yet, but she was ready to face it. When they finally pulled into her neighborhood, the sun had started to set behind a layer of gray clouds, casting a dull, eerie orange over the street. Rachel stepped out of the car with her breath caught in her throat. Her hands were trembling, her stomach clenched. "I can go in with you," Miss Walker offered softly. "Just in case." Rachel shook her head. "No, this has to be just me. If he tries anything, call the police. But I need to see him. Alone." She walked toward the house slowly, each step heavier than the last. Her front door looked the same, calm, familiar, innocent. But now, it felt like the entrance to something darker, something she didn't want to believe in. Before she reached for the doorknob, something made her stop. She moved quietly to the side of the house, to the front window, the one that always had a slight crack in the curtain. She peeked inside, just enough to see the living room. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it. Couch fluffed, rug clean, framed family pictures on the wall. But then she saw them, Greg and Liam. They were walking across the room, Liam with his arms hanging at his sides, moving stiffly, clearly in discomfort. He reached for his lower back and winced. "I told you it would hurt, Dad," Liam murmured, his voice tired and worn. "I know, buddy," Greg answered gently. "I didn't think it would hurt this much. I'm sorry, just hang in there, okay?" Rachel's heart dropped. That was enough. She backed away from the window like she had touched fire, turned on her heel, and ran back to the car where Mrs. Walker and Mrs. Carter were waiting. Her voice came out broken, barely louder than a breath. "Call the police. Now, please." The flashing lights arrived within minutes. Rachel stood by the front gate, her face pale, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to keep from falling apart. "Ms. Walker stood behind her with one hand on her shoulder, silent but steady. 2 patrol cars pulled up, followed by a black, unmarked cruiser. The officers got out quickly. Detective Harris, tall and sharp-eyed, approached first. Rachel turned to face him. "My husband. He's hurting my son. Please, just go in. I saw it." That was all he needed. With a motion of his hand, the officers surrounded the house. One knocked firmly on the door. Inside, Greg's voice was faint but confused. What the hell is going on? When he opened the door and saw the police, his face turned white. "What is this?" he asked, stunned. "What's going on?" Ms. Walker, Mrs. Carter, and Rachel stepped forward as the officers pushed into the house. Rachel didn't wait. She stormed past them into the living room and found Liam standing there, confused and scared. "Mom," he said, eyes wide. "I missed you." Rachel ran to him and dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms, holding him so tightly it almost hurt. "I'm here now, baby," she whispered against his hair. "I'm here. I promise no one's going to hurt you again." "Are you and Dad fighting?" he asked softly, looking up at her. Rachel tried to hold back her tears. "Go to your room, sweetheart." "I need to talk to your dad." Liam obeyed, glancing back one more time before disappearing down the hall. Greg, still in the middle of the room, was surrounded now by officers. His eyes darted between them, to his wife, to the principal, to the teacher. "Rachel, what is happening?" he demanded. "Why are the cops in our house? What did I do?" Rachel pointed her finger at him like a sword. "You know exactly what you did," she hissed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You hurt our son, and I saw it with my own eyes." Greg's face crumbled in disbelief. "What? No, I didn't. Are you crazy?" Detective Harris stepped forward. "Sir, you're under investigation for potential child abuse. You'll have the opportunity to speak at the station. The cuffs clicked around Greg's wrists. Wait, no. This is a mistake. I didn't do anything. As the officers began to lead him out, Liam rushed back out of his room and froze at the sight. No! Don't take my dad, he screamed, panicked. Please, he didn't do anything. Tell them, Liam, Greg pleaded. Tell them I didn't hurt you. Liam's eyes filled with tears. I told them it was a secret. I didn't mean to. I didn't want this. Rachel pulled him into her arms again. It's okay, she whispered. Mommy's here. Mommy's got you. No one's ever going to make you lie again. And just like that, the front door closed behind Greg Turner. And the family was left behind, broken, scared, and finally, no longer silent. Here begins Part 8, the doctor's verdict, the chapter where certainty unravels, assumptions collapse, and one twist turns everything on its head. The police cruiser had barely pulled away from the house when Miss Walker and Mrs. Carter exchanged a glance. A subtle one, filled with questions neither could put into words. Rachel stood frozen in the doorway, arms wrapped tightly around Liam. The boy was still crying, his small hands clutching at her sweater, his voice trembling. Mom, please, they can't take Dad, he whimpered. Rachel knelt down in front of him, brushing his hair back gently. Sweetheart, listen to me. You're safe now, but we have to make sure nothing else is wrong, okay? We're going to take you to the doctor, just to see what's going on with this pain you've been feeling. Liam's expression twisted. I don't want to go. I don't want anyone to touch me or ask questions. Please, Mom, I'm fine. It's getting better already. But Miss Walker stepped forward, speaking gently but firmly. Liam, we need to know how serious it is. You've been in pain for days. We're not going to let you keep hurting, sweetheart. Mrs. Carter nodded in agreement. It's important for us and for your dad that we understand exactly what's going on. Rachel took a deep breath and kissed the top of Liam's head. We'll go together. I'll be right beside you the whole time, I promise. The pediatric wing at the hospital was quiet, the walls painted with jungle animals and smiling suns. But none of it could mask the tension in the air as Rachel and Liam waited in the small exam room. Dr. Ann Bennett, a kind-eyed woman in her 50s with decades of experience, entered with a clipboard in hand. She greeted them warmly, her tone calm but professional. Good afternoon. I understand Liam's been having some pain when sitting. Rachel stood beside her son, arms crossed, her eyes bloodshot from crying. Yes, for several days now. He says it hurts in his lower back, or back there. He hasn't been able to sit in class. He says it started after he and his father were doing something, but he won't explain what. The doctor's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she nodded. Okay, let's take a look. She asked Liam a series of questions. When it started, where exactly it hurt, how long he could sit, whether he'd fallen, if there was swelling, bruising, or any other symptoms. Liam answered each one quietly, avoiding eye contact. He flinched once when she asked if he'd ever been hurt by someone, but he still said no. Then came the exam. Rachel stood in the corner, arms folded tight across her chest, as Dr. Bennett gently checked Liam's posture, mobility, and pressure points. He grimaced slightly when she pressed around his tailbone, but didn't cry or pull away. After 10 more minutes, the doctor stood, wrote something on her clipboard, and smiled softly. I've finished the exam. You can sit up now, Liam. Rachel leaned forward. What is it? Dr. Bennett turned to her with the calm, measured tone of someone who has delivered thousands of diagnoses, some heartbreaking, some relieving. He's okay. Rachel blinked. What do you mean? There are no signs of trauma, no bruising, no inflammation, no tearing, nothing that indicates abuse or injury. Ms. Walker, who had been standing just outside the room with Mrs. Carter, stepped in. Then what's causing the pain? Dr. Bennett nodded and held up her notes. Liam has been spending long hours sitting on a hard, flat surface with poor posture. That kind of pressure over days, especially for a child his age, can cause significant discomfort in the lower back and tailbone area. It's common in kids who sit on benches, wooden stools, or any unsupportive seat for extended periods. Rachel's face dropped. That's it? The doctor smiled gently. It might not sound serious, but it can be quite painful. I gave him a mild injection to help with the inflammation and prescribed a cushion and pain reliever. He'll feel much better by tomorrow. Liam looked up at his mom. See? I told you I was fine. But Rachel couldn't speak. She was frozen. Her eyes searched the room for something to hold on to, some explanation, some anchor. Miss Walker stepped closer. But what about what we heard in the recording? Rachel turned toward her slowly, her face pale. He said they were doing something in secret, that no one could know. Dr. Bennett raised an eyebrow. What was it? Liam stood from the exam table, still a little sore, but now with tears filling his eyes. He looked at his mother. Can I show you instead? He asked. Rachel nodded. Okay, he whispered. Then let's go home. They drove in silence. Back at the Turner home, Liam walked ahead, leading them all, his mother, Ms. Walker, Mrs. Carter, down the hallway, past the kitchen, past the laundry room, to a small door that had been closed for years. He stopped and looked up at Rachel. Dad said it was supposed to be a surprise for your birthday. He opened the door. The room smelled of sawdust and varnish. Tools lined the walls, and in the center, beneath a plastic tarp, stood a large, hand-carved dining table. 6 matching chairs surrounded it, each detailed with tiny, painted hearts along the backrest. Rachel stepped in slowly. She touched the wood with trembling fingers. It was smooth, perfect, shiny, a piece of art. Liam walked beside her. Dad said you always wanted a proper table, one that fit the whole family. So we started working on it together every afternoon. But the stools in his workshop are really hard. I was sitting for hours. That's what made it hurt. That's what we were doing in secret. Rachel covered her mouth. Tears poured down her cheeks. Ms. Walker stood in the doorway, frozen. Mrs. Carter leaned against the doorframe, eyes wide. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. All the assumptions, all the fear, all the heartbreak. It had all been real, but it had also been wrong. And now, everything had changed. Here begins Part 9, The Secret Workshop, the chapter where truth is laid bare, regret cuts deep, and forgiveness becomes a fragile question no one knows how to answer. Rachel stood in the center of the small workshop, her fingers trembling against the polished edge of the table. The room was silent, only the soft, uneven breathing of those present. Ms. Walker, Mrs. Carter, Liam could be heard, each of them frozen in the moment, their minds trying to reconcile what their eyes were seeing with everything they had believed until now. The dining table was beautiful, handmade, solid oak, with smooth corners and delicate carvings. Each chair had been personalized, small heart-shaped engravings on the backrests, initials painted underneath in careful, clumsy brushstrokes. Rachel's knees buckled slightly, and she gripped the edge of the table for support. This is what you were doing," she whispered, her voice breaking. Liam nodded slowly. "Dad said we had to finish it before you came back. He wanted it to be a surprise for your birthday. That's why we didn't tell anyone." Rachel shook her head in disbelief. "But the pain, you were hurting every day." Liam looked down at his shoes, guilt in his voice. "I didn't want to tell anyone because Dad said it'd ruin the surprise. I didn't want to ruin it, Mom. He said pain means you're working hard for someone you love." Those words hit Rachel like a punch to the chest. She turned and looked at Miss Walker and Mrs. Carter. Both women stood still, expressions heavy with guilt and shock. The color had drained from their faces. "I called the police," Rachel said, more to herself than anyone else. "I screamed at him. I called him a monster. And all this time, he was trying to give me this." Liam walked closer to his mother, his voice quiet. He made me promise not to tell because he wanted you to cry from happiness when you saw it. He said real surprises are supposed to come from love and sacrifice. Rachel couldn't hold it anymore. She dropped to her knees and began sobbing, loud, uncontrollable sobs that seemed to shake the walls of the workshop. The kind of crying that comes not just from pain, but from shame, from love, from realizing the damage a misunderstanding can cause. I ruined everything, she wept. I sent him to jail for trying to love me in his own way. I thought I was protecting my son, and I ended up destroying the man who never stopped loving us. Ms. Walker stepped forward, her voice thick with emotion. Rachel, I'm so sorry. We never imagined this would be the truth. We heard what we heard and we assumed the worst, Rachel finished, standing back up with Liam's help. You both did what you thought was right. I did too. And now he's sitting in a cell thinking we betrayed him. Mrs. Carter approached quietly. We'll make it right. We'll go to the station right now. We'll explain everything. Rachel nodded. Her voice was steadier now, but her eyes still swam in tears. Please stay with Liam, she said. I need to go. I need to see him. I need to tell him I believe in him again. 15 minutes later, Rachel stepped into the cold lobby of the Portland Police Department. She walked past the front desk, eyes puffy, face pale, and asked to speak to Detective Harris. He arrived quickly, surprised to see her. You've got to release my husband, she said. Now. Detective Harris raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, we're still investigating. I have a doctor's report, Rachel interrupted, handing over the folder. No abuse, no trauma, just a physical strain from sitting too long on a hard surface. That's all. My son was helping his father build me a handmade table. That's the secret they were hiding. A gift. The detective opened the folder, scanned the page, and exhaled sharply through his nose. Rachel's voice softened. Please, let him go. He doesn't deserve this. I accused the man I love of something unthinkable, and I was wrong. Detective Harris nodded slowly. Wait here. Minutes later, Greg Turner was led out from the holding area. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands were still cuffed, but the moment he saw Rachel, he stopped in his tracks. Rachel! She ran to him, not with anger, not with guilt, but with urgency. And when she reached him, she dropped to her knees right there on the cold tile floor of the police station. Forgive me, she choked out, sobbing. Please, Greg, forgive me. I thought I was protecting our son. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I didn't listen. I didn't ask. I just acted. Greg stood silent for a moment, stunned. Then slowly, the officer behind him unlocked the cuffs. They fell to the floor with a metallic clink. He dropped to his knees too, in front of her, and pulled her into his arms. You were scared, he whispered. You acted with your heart. You did what a mother does. Rachel pulled back just far enough to look in his eyes. You're not angry. I'm hurt, Greg said honestly. But no, I'm not angry, because I love you, and because I know you love our son and me. They stood together, holding each other, surrounded by officers and echoes and fluorescent lights. But for that moment, they were alone in the world. A husband who gave everything in silence. A wife who let fear cloud her love. And two broken hearts finally stitched back together with truth. Here begins Part 10. Forgiveness and the Birthday Dinner. The final chapter. Where broken bonds are mended, love is laid bare, and the family sits down at a table that carries more than just food. It carries everything they've been through. The day of Rachel's birthday arrived just 1 week later. The sun finally broke through the gray skies that had lingered over Portland for days. It shone warmly through the kitchen window as Rachel moved around the house, preparing food, humming softly to herself, a melody she used to sing before all of this began. Her hands still trembled occasionally, her heart still ached from what had happened. But today felt different. Forgiveness had not come easily, not from Greg, not from herself. The pain of the accusations, the police, The confusion in Liam's eyes, none of it had vanished, but it had begun to soften. The wound hadn't closed yet, but it was healing. In the dining room, the once hidden table now stood proudly in the center. Polished to perfection, the 6 wooden chairs stood around it like sentinels of something sacred. Rachel had laid out the plates herself, napkins folded carefully, candles in the center, and in the middle of it all, a small handmade card that read, "Happy birthday, Mom, love, Liam and Dad." Tears filled her eyes again, but she blinked them away. Not today. Today was not about sadness. It was about rebuilding. Greg arrived early, carrying a casserole dish and looking more nervous than he ever had in his life. Liam opened the door and ran straight into his arms. "Dad!" he shouted, wrapping his arms around his father's waist. Greg crouched down and hugged him back tightly. "Hey, buddy." Liam leaned back and looked into his eyes. "I'm sorry I told our secret. I didn't want to. I just didn't know what else to do." Greg smiled gently and brushed his fingers through Liam's hair. "You did what you had to do. I'm proud of you." Rachel stood in the hallway, watching them. She walked forward slowly, her eyes meeting Greg's. This time, not with fear, not with suspicion, but with softness. The kind of gaze that had once said, "I choose you," and now again somehow did. "Hi," she said. Greg smiled. "Hey." They hugged, briefly, gently, but enough to say, "We're still here." That evening, just before sunset, Ms. Walker and Mrs. Carter arrived, at Rachel's invitation. There was a moment of awkward silence at the door. The 2 women stood there, unsure of whether they would be welcomed or turned away. But Greg stepped forward, opened the door wider, and said simply, "Come in, please." In the dining room, the 6 of them sat. Greg, Rachel, Liam, Ms. Walker, Mrs. Carter, and even Dr. Bennett, who had been invited as a thank you for bringing clarity when everyone else had lost sight of it. Laughter began slowly. Awkward smiles turned into real ones, and stories began to flow. Ms. Walker finally spoke through a quiet breath. "Greg, I'm so sorry. I jumped to conclusions. I didn't give you a chance to speak. I let fear take over my judgment, and I know that could have destroyed your life." Greg looked at her across the table. His voice was calm. "You thought you were protecting a child. You weren't trying to hurt me. You were trying to help my son. I understand that, I do. But next time, talk, ask, listen." Ms. Walker nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I will, I swear." Mrs. Carter added softly, "We thought we were being cautious, but we weren't careful." "Not really." Greg looked around the room and exhaled deeply. "The truth is, I forgive you, all of you, because I know what it's like to be afraid. And because Liam," he looked at his son who was grinning, "Liam taught me that even pain has purpose if love is behind it." Rachel reached under the table and took Greg's hand. She squeezed it gently. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. "I never stopped building this for you," he replied, motioning toward the table. Liam chimed in proudly. "And I helped carve the hearts." Everyone laughed. And then they ate, they talked, they healed. Not all at once. Healing never happens all at once. But tonight was the beginning. That handmade table, once built in secret, once suspected of hiding something sinister, now held warmth, laughter, forgiveness, and food. It had been made with pain, but now it would be remembered for love.